Welcome. We're so glad that you've decided to join us today. We look forward to spending some time with you and sharing some insights we hope you'll find both valuable and actionable. My name is Stacy Horn. I'm the Business Development Director at HORNE Cyber. And we at HORNE Cyber are very pleased to be collaborating today with Fibertown. We continue to deepen our relationship and see ourselves as complementary in the services and offerings that we provide. And as we begin today, I'd like to ask a question. And that question is, what is one takeaway, one thing you hope to gain from our time today? And if you would, please find and use your Q&A feature to respond. And by the way, there's whether it's a general or a specific response, there's no wrong answer here. And so whether you've decided to respond or not, you're now familiar with the Q&A process and where that is. And so I wanted to just give you a heads up that at any point today, please feel free to submit questions. If you have one in mind, or if anything that we share sparks a question, our panel will address questions after our presentations today. And as it relates to presentations, and speaking of presentations, first up we have Mike Skinner from HORNE Cyber, and Mike is HORNE Cyber's partner in charge. And after Mike, we'll hear from Joe Langston, who's Fibertown's Vice President of Operation. So with that, I'd like to pass the baton over to Mike.
Great, thanks Stacy, and thanks everyone again for joining us today. What I'm going to talk about first is just give an overview of today's threat landscape as it relates to cyber threats that are continuing to evolve during this COVID-19 situation. You know, hackers love to exploit opportunity and vulnerability. And right now in the current COVID-19 coronavirus crisis, there's a lot of opportunity and a lot of vulnerabilities out there for hackers to exploit. When I'm talking to our clients, one thing that I've noticed is organizations are seeing an increase in cyber attacks right now. Organizations that really weren't dealing with cyber incidents or cyber attacks are really being hit right now. And this is across all industries. Areas such as their websites are being hit. Their remote workers are being targeted. And there's a lot of new and evolving techniques that these hackers are using given the current environment that we're operating in. Another area that we're struggling with as a nation is fighting against state-backed hackers, foreign nation state-backed hackers that are targeting our coronavirus response. Organizations in healthcare, pharmaceutical, academia, medical research, and supply chain are all being targeted by these state-backed hackers to obtain strategic information about how we're responding to the coronavirus situation. They're also intending to disrupt our supply chain related to our response to coronavirus. Another key area of risk and evolving threats that we're seeing is the explosion in crisis-related disinformation and social engineering campaigns. We're seeing a lot of hackers phishing for credentials. These are the phishing emails that hackers send to our users, trying to get them to act, trying to get them to log in to a spoofed website so they can gain our username and passwords and access our real live production infrastructure. Another thing right now is there's a lot of COVID-19 themed lures for malware distribution. In the past, when we didn't have this current situation, the lures that hackers were using were starting to become known and easily picked up. But now users want to click on information about COVID-19. They want to read and click on links in emails about the coronavirus response. And hackers know that, and they're exploiting that. Also, about 7 weeks ago now, almost 8 weeks ago, organizations had to switch from an on-premise scenario to an infrastructure based on and accommodating remote workforce. Employees at most organizations right now are working remote, whether it's from their home on their home network or from an alternate location. They're, for the most part, not working in the offices that they're used to working in. What this has done is this has expanded the attack surface that hackers have to target. For organizations, it's much easier to secure endpoints on a network that they can control, but now we have users on networks that they don't control. And we're also seeing risks associated with potentially hostile environments. These are unsecure home Wi-Fi networks. These are networks that are not under the control of the organization from a security perspective. And on top of all of this, we're still undermanned in this fight against hackers. Statistics still show that there are going to be 3.5 million unfilled cybersecurity jobs by the end of 2021. And with all of this, we're fighting against these foreign nation states who have complete divisions and complete scenario setups of hackers that are focused on attacking our US organizations. Another thing we're seeing is increased registrations of domain names that are related to COVID-19 or related to coronavirus. This makes it much easier for attackers to send these phishing messages to our users with a domain name that looks legitimate. So I did mention a few minutes ago that the remote workforce change has presented some significant risks. And some specific risks that we're seeing are related to, one, virtual private networks. As these remote workers are working from their homes, many of them are connecting through VPNs, many of which have well-known vulnerabilities that are published out on the internet or out on the dark web. And these hackers are scanning networks and scanning the open internet to identify these vulnerable VPN devices. Also, workers are using remote working tools such as Citrix and Remote Desktop. All of these also have well-known vulnerabilities that the hackers are scanning for and exploiting. And as many of you, I'm sure, use on a daily basis, there's been an explosion in the use of internet-based communications platforms. What this does is this gives hackers a prime phishing pretext to use. I'm sure you see maybe in your spam filter or in your inbox from time to time, messages that appear to come from a legitimate internet communications platform. Many of these emails, users click on and provide their credentials, thinking they're logging into their Microsoft Teams account, logging into their Zoom account or WebEx. But in fact, these are spoofed websites, and now those hackers have the credentials to get in to our internet communications platforms. Another risk with these platforms is patch management. As more and more users have been implementing these technologies on a daily basis, the developers and vendors have had to fix security flaws. They've had to fix other flaws that have been identified through the explosion of use of these tools. Unfortunately, many users aren't updating these communications platforms as needed, and the critical security fixes that are included in those updates are not being applied. Also, these platforms have released new security controls, new security features that must be implemented. There needs to be an action by a user taken to implement these security controls, but unfortunately, some users aren't implementing those security controls. And I mentioned before home Wi-Fi. Home Wi-Fi presents significant risk for IT organizations in that those networks are not under their control. They cannot secure the Wi-Fi network in your home or in your employees' homes. Oftentimes, these Wi-Fi networks are insecure. They're set up by a telecommunications provider, and the credentials to log into those networks or log into the router for those networks is often left at the default. This presents significant risk and allows an unwarranted user to access the network of these employees in their homes, and in turn, the devices that are connected to them. We've also seen an increase in personally owned devices being used for work purposes. I mentioned a few minutes ago that essentially overnight, organizations had to switch from an on-premise to a remote workforce scenario. A lot of users still had desktops in their offices, and they couldn't move those desktops to their homes because they couldn't access the offices that they were working in. Personal devices obviously present the risk of the inability for the IT organization to secure those devices because the organization doesn't own those devices. And we're also seeing an increase in what's known as shadow IT. Shadow IT is the use of services that are unknown or unsanctioned by the organization's IT environment. Some examples of shadow IT scenarios are things like Dropbox, Box.com. A lot of users working from home may not have access to the file shares that they did in the office. So they're starting to save these sensitive documents and sensitive information on these unsanctioned platforms that their IT department doesn't know about. And the risk with that is if the IT department doesn't know about it, the IT department cannot secure it. Another risk that was a risk before COVID-19 and I'm confident will continue to be a risk after COVID-19 is that our users are always our weakest link. User behaviors create most vulnerabilities that are present on our networks and in our infrastructure. The server doesn't make itself insecure. The door to your server room doesn't leave itself open and unlocked. It's always a user, a human that's behind those activities. And as I mentioned before, phishing continues to be a key area that we're seeing users presenting risk to their organization. And right now in the current environment, the 4 pillars of a phishing attack are critical and really enable hackers to exploit our users. These messages show authority, urgency, emotion, and scarcity. And right now, users are uneasy. There's a lot of economic and healthcare concerns out there right now that is up to the anxiety level of our users. So when they get a message that shows that it's from an authority, it has an urgent action requested, it ties to their emotion, or it describes a scarce item such as personal protective equipment or other needs in this current time, it's most likely that a user is going to click on that email. And oftentimes after clicking on that email, they'll provide their credentials or they'll download a malicious file to their local PC. And also, business email compromise continues to be one of the biggest risks associated with users today. This is where hackers compromise an email system and interject themselves in the communications between your users and a legitimate customer or a legitimate vendor, often trying to get them to reroute payment or change payment information. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Joe Langston with Fibertown to talk to us a little bit about some resiliency areas and data security. Joe?
All right. Hello, everyone. And yeah, I will be speaking a little bit more to the physical aspects of security in the location where you house your servers and networking equipment that, of course, is the lifeblood of the organization and the resiliency moving forward. Fibertown is a co-location data center provider. We have different locations, one located in the heart of Houston, right next to the economic zone where everybody who has what we like to refer to as server envy may find it useful to have their gear at within arm's reach at a close at hand. And we also have a data center in Bryan, College Station area in Central Texas, which is far removed from the storm affected zone. As you know, Houston is a hurricane-prone area, Gulf Coast region area that may be affected by storms and flooding and other natural events. And our Bryan Data Center is located far enough away that we don't have significant effects from those same events, but at the same time, within a close proximity, you don't have to jump on a plane, you won't be on the road for several hours or anything along those lines. Each of our data centers has availability, accessibility from multiple roadways, different pathways to get from Bryan to Houston, and of course, multiple major highways connecting to. The main thing that I can recommend for anyone who's interested in doing business with a co-location provider is what kind of people are you dealing with. At Fibertown, we believe that the extraordinary should be the ordinary, and we are here to support the success of our customers in every need, all the time. So talking about the resiliency of your data security and data center, I think we have to ask ourselves some more difficult questions, and difficult because we might not want to know or hear the answers to those questions about kind of how is our gear housed. If you can say yes to the question about whether your gear is housed in a co-location data center facility, you're in a good place. What we hear pretty often is, it's in that closet down at the end of the hall. No one has access to that room. I don't know what goes on in there. We had to add air conditioning to it last summer to make sure that it kept up with everything that was going on, and et cetera. So a co-location data center adds to your resiliency by providing redundant power and cooling and IT infrastructure in a carrier neutral environment to serve your infrastructure. So to explain a little bit of that, power redundancy, power is fed to your server rack in two independent feeds, one A source with a given pathway, given equipment that's not duplicated between the alternate B source of power. So a separate transformer from utility, for example, uninterrupted power supplies and power distribution units delivering power in an A fashion, and then an identical but separate set of the same delivery for an alternate B source. That same thing is done with cooling. You may have a central plant with a chiller or something providing the primary cooling, but then you have an alternate for that as well. And exactly the same sort of thing for internet connectivity coming in. A properly designed co-location facility is going to have multiple entry points for fiber optic connectivity coming into the facility, so that you have you can pass what we call the backhoe test. If you're outside digging with a backhoe and you cut a fiber into the building, did it take down everything? If you're on a single leg type facility, the answer to that will unfortunately be yes. Co-location centers are designed to avoid that sort of a situation. So you have multiple entries of fiber optic cabling coming into the building to connect it outside to your network. So redundancy is extremely important. Does your co-location provider offer a 99.999 or 5 nines of uptime guarantee or greater? At Fibertown, we offer 100% uptime guarantee, and we offer that with the intent of never needing to pay out on an SLA because we weren't able to maintain our side of the bargain, what we were supposed to deliver. So co-location providers today are set up to handle from the very smallest company to the very largest enterprise, a Fortune 500 company out there with anything from 1U of rack space available, kind of a managed environment, to a customer environment that may encompass 10,000 square feet or greater of rack space. One key factor in the selection process and adding to the resiliency of your company solution is, does that data center provider have a network operations center team on site who can provide remote services for you? If you're counting on one of the members of your team to be woken up in the middle of the night, travel to the data center, take care of some issue or problem that occurred unexpectedly, and handle that, there's a time lag associated with that sort of activity. So we have personnel on site at the Network Operations Center who can handle that 24/7, 365. We are here on Christmas Eve and Christmas night, New Year's, you name it, every day of the year, to make sure that we can take care of that customer and support their success. Another important factor for the co-location data center is security. The physical security should be robust. There should be on-site security personnel, and they should be monitoring video and live, and then that video should be being retained on recording material for a minimum of 30 days, so that you have retention and the ability to go back and see what happened in case something does occur. So moving into some of the more technical parts of it, we also offer business continuity office space. Each of our data center locations has a business continuity office campus. We have room to grow at both for office space as well as in data center space. So that's a good question. Is your provider a scalable provider? Do you have the ability to grow with, or does this provider have ability to grow your environment with your growth at your pace? And are they willing to work with you on that? So talking about business continuity resiliency office space, you may ask, why would I need that? What does it entail? It's gonna be at Fibertown. It's a dedicated private office. It's your office. You can get in any time of day or night. It has managed access control. So you provide an access card to your team members, and they can come and go as you authorize them to do so. That access control is managed by Fibertown, so that you can always add and remove people 24/7, 365, once again, as the need comes up to do those things. The office spaces are, is your emergency office space backed up by a generator, so that when there's a utility power delivery issue, are you going to be able to continue to operate? Is there uninterrupted power supply available, so that once again, you're going to be able to operate through that transition between utility failing and, say, an automatic generator starting and transferring the load to that generator? That's about a 15-second process, but it happens regardless of where you're located. If you're going to be utilizing an automatic generator, it's going to take 15 seconds to get up, operating, and carry the load. So you need an uninterrupted power supply to cover that gap between those events. A question that comes up pretty often is, well, what do we do if, say, the air conditioner goes out in our remote office space? Who's monitoring and taking care of that? And that's a good question for your provider. At a Fibertown space, your maintenance and repairs are included in the offering. It's a part of the deal, and we'll be monitoring that space and taking care of it and making sure that there are no issues there. The same is true with utilities. All of the utilities at our spaces are included in the pricing, and you don't have to worry about what's going to happen in an additional variable billing amount or anything along those lines. Once again, on-site security 24/7 is an important part of it. So the commitment to the customer is there, and by designing redundant and purpose-built critical infrastructure, customer data will not be affected by those events that occur, whether they're natural events like hurricanes, flooding, and natural disasters. Redundant office space also provides the ability to have a similar reliability to the data center in an alternative office space. It allows you to split your teams. One of the things for pandemic response that we did at Fibertown was we split our teams into groups so that they were segregated from one another. Some people are working from home, some people are working from office spaces, and some people are working from alternative office spaces. We have several customers for business continuity office space who we're seeing utilize their spaces in a very similar manner to that. They have designated teams who work out of a given office space, designated teams that work out of their home office space, and they're utilizing that space to its fullest and keeping those important critical team members segregated. Redundant office space, there are many solutions out there. One of the questions I think you would need to ask your provider is my space available to me at all times, regardless of what happens? Will I need to declare or make an activation? And is this space a first come, first serve type solution that may be used up if I'm not the first come, first serve type customer that first to declare or et cetera? Is there a timing of deployment for this space? We see some solutions where vendors are bringing out mobile trailers, and they have workstations set up in these mobile trailers, and your team can go to work as soon as they can get the trailer to site, get the power activated to that trailer and turned on, get connectivity established, and then you can get your network installed and your equipment in and people operating out of that facility. That's a good solution. Is it more complicated than simply driving to an alternate location or having your team report to an alternate location to go to work in the next hour? That's an internal question you have to ask. Obviously, there are different costs involved as well. Another part of it is having that service team on site. Think about the people that you're doing business with. When you're looking at different providers, you have to be thinking about, are these people who are welcoming and inviting, are they responsive to my requests and concerns and able to answer the questions that I have? Are they prepared to support my needs in a time of need? At Fibertown, we have a network operations center team. They currently hold several different certifications. We have multiple A+ certified technicians. Network Plus is a pretty common one among our team as well. We have people with CCNA certifications, CCNA Cyber Ops, and CJIS Level 2, along with others. These people are here and available to support you. And during the pandemic, we've actually seen a significant need for that because, as you know, lots of travel's been restricted, not only by the government, but lots of companies have, our customers have instituted travel restriction policies, and they're not allowing people to travel at all. So our network operations center team has stepped up to the call of multiple customers in each given day. We've seen lots of additional connectivity, as you can imagine, with everyone working remotely and and needing to rely more heavily on connectivity. And we've seen lots of new cross connects to different connectivity providers. Our team has racked a lot of equipment for different customers. We can do all of the setup, physical setup as well, and allow you to remote into that equipment and take care of whatever you need to do on your side to get it up and operational. We have been there to support our customers, and we always will be. We'll remain open 24/7, 365 through all of these events. Another thing I'd like to touch on when you're talking about a co-location data center facility is that, and or a business continuity office facility, is that facility located outside the 500-year floodplain? Is it going to remain accessible when we have an event along the lines of Hurricane Harvey, Hurricane Imelda, the tax day flood, or other events that recently occurred in the Gulf Coast region? Our facilities have all remained fully accessible during 100% of those times. We've had people coming and leaving for work, and customers arriving at the sites during all of these events. And we've been able to remain operational and continue to provide that customer support. And I think that's a very key factor when you're talking about resiliency. On the most beautiful day of the year, you need a place that has all of those features, but it also has to be available on the worst day of the year that may not have been planned. Even at a time when you can't personally go, you got to be able to take care of business and get equipment shipped in and racked and stacked and ready to go. So I think with that, we're going to be ready to open it up for questions.
Great. Thanks, Joe. Appreciate you sharing all that information with us. And as Joe mentioned, we are going to open this up for audience question and answer session with our panelists. Just to introduce our panelists again, we have Joe Langston, who just spoke, the VP of Operations at Fibertown. We have Jacob Bertling, who is the Director of Operations at Fibertown. And we also have Brad Pierce, who is Director of Network Security with us at HORNE Cyber. So with that, I'm going to pass the first question to you, Jacob. Jacob, why is designated business continuity office space better than a remote office that I could lease through my broker?
Good question. A couple things with just having an extra office. I mean, you know, if you're maintaining your own office, you have to have additional staff and everything to manage that office. So, whereas a full business continuity suite like we offer has, you know, your cleaning staff, your maintenance staff. Also, depending on how remote it is, I mean, we've seen people with offices as far away as Phoenix when they're based in Houston and stuff like that. You know, air travel was restricted somewhat during this COVID event, so that makes things challenging logistically to get your team to those remote sites. You know, we specifically for the Gulf Coast market are uniquely situated to be a day drive. I think most Houstonians probably commute further in a normal business day than they would to come to the Bryan Data Center, or at least it seems that way. Having a business continuity site set up also helps logistically with data circuits that are directly connected to your work site or your data center space from your worksite office. These circuits, you know, if you can count on them to be up because, you know, everything here is passive between you and that data center space. So if you have your circuits here delivered to your data center, then they're, you know, you're on net with your data center space where you need to operate. Some other things, just besides the logistics and everything, having staff local to help manage things. So we've encountered a number of people that have a worksite recovery space, but have some level of data center within that space or services in that space that they need to maintain remotely, and our staff's been on site and capable of supporting them. So whether it be simple on-site hands and eyes or actually assisting in running cable or getting connections up or anything like that, having a team that you can count on 24/7 to assist with those things has been critical.
Okay, great. And I just want to remind everybody, we do have some questions coming in, but any questions that you do want to ask the panelists, you can use the Q&A feature down at the bottom of the Zoom window. Next question, I'll pass to you, Brad. Brad, what unique attacks are you seeing in the current threat landscape posed by the COVID-19 situation?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. That's a good question, and it's certainly a very strange time. So my day-to-day is around our penetration testing and our cybersecurity operations center. So I've got a good tempo on what we see with our clients, but then I also do a lot of research around trying to stay ahead of what is to come. And so I'm going to kind of expound on a couple of things that Mike mentioned in his talk. And so a couple of the things that we're seeing, while the criminal groups that are out there and functioning, they're continuing their normal operations, I would say there is an uptick on a lot of the scanning that's being conducted, and a lot of things that have been changed in infrastructure to allow remote workforce to do their jobs remotely has yielded some insecure configurations. And I know that the bad guys are out there constantly looking for those. So we've seen the criminal groups up their game a little bit, but what we've also seen is what we would consider hobby hackers with a lot more time on their hands, which can be extremely dangerous given the fact that you can go to certain sections of the dark web and lease out infrastructure to launch an attack from, whether it be a ransomware attack or a malware campaign. But you can go out and rent these infrastructures, and if you have an email target list, then you can launch a ransomware campaign against that email target list. And the rental of these infrastructures are pennies on the dollar, and it can yield quite a profit if the ransomware is successful and they do have individuals pay the ransom. So, aside from that, we're seeing anywhere from a 25 to 50% increase in just the general internet scanning that is conducted every day. And this is more or less a dragnet, if you will. So, these guys are scanning every single port that listens on the internet to determine what that port is, and can they determine what it's doing, and then can they pivot from that port into a different section of a victim's infrastructure. As Mike mentioned, phishing is a huge concern. A compiled statistic from various of the global providers around Cloudflare and Barracuda and companies like that, the phishing attacks are up over 600% since February. And so one of the big concerns out there right now, and a lot of domain registrars are struggling to keep up with this, is they're trying to disable and they're halting the auto domain registration process and putting a more robust verification system in, so that because they're seeing a huge uptick in COVID-19 related website registration. And so these sites get registered and configured in a way to run, a scam campaign against victims. And so, that's something we're seeing. And then the last thing I'll point out with regard to types of attacks is I've had several clients and read about several stories where, so there's a VPN method or a configuration between a split tunnel VPN and a full tunnel VPN. And so a split tunnel VPN is pretty common. And what that means is that if you're at your house and you use your corporate VPN, the traffic that is destined for your corporate work is going to go to your corporate network, and the traffic that's destined for the internet goes out the internet connection there at your home. And so what we've seen is a lot of people, a lot of companies, without traversing that traffic back through their their data center and their firewall, they lose control of that traffic. And what it does is it can allow a user to click a link or in a website or an email that normally would be intercepted and blocked by their firewall. It is now being allowed due to that split tunnel VPN. And so we've worked with several clients, and one of the big takeaways from that is really sit down with their IT team and evaluate the usage of a split tunnel versus full tunnel VPN for the duration of, especially this remote work period, but moving forward as well. And so and I would say the big kicker here, and where everybody that I've helped, probably 10 or 12 clients over the past 6 months, has been around the lack of multi-factor authentication on their infrastructure. And so when you don't, so I would say, we're looking at a lot of people that are on Office 365 and cloud platforms that probably have some kind of multi-factor authentication mechanism built in. And so this process needs to be leveraged. And once it's leveraged, there needs to be a life cycle of checking the security groups for that. And I'm working, when we get off of this call, I'm going to go back to the analysis of Exchange 365 logs for a client that had, it's a 750 user organization, and they had one user that got phished, and that one user somehow was not in the multi-factor authentication group. And so what it did was it prompted them to do an audit of that, amongst a lot of other things, action items that had to be taken from that. But they discovered that there were about 7 people that had not made it into that multi-factor authentication group. And it really just undermined the whole entire project since, that one got through like it did. So, the big takeaway from the attacks is that, the people element, as Mike mentioned, is more important than ever. Our people are in a vulnerable situation anyway. If they are working from home, it's a little bit out of their zone. And furthermore, we consider anything outside of a corporate network as a hostile environment. So if you take a corporate asset from behind that firewall and connect it to a Wi-Fi router or a switch somewhere, you've then entered a hostile environment for all practical purposes. So, it's important to keep that in mind and think of things in terms of, what can we do to control the user's access, at a remote, in a remote fashion. And a lot of that will ultimately circle back to the VPN statistics and facts that I talked about around split tunnel versus full tunnel.
Great. Well, thanks, Brad. The next question I'll pass to you, Joe. The question is, can you provide an example of how your facilities have supported customers during the pandemic lockdown?
Yeah, so one of the things that we've seen, one of our customers is the Combined Emergency Operations Center for Texas A&M University, which is a state level organization, obviously, Brazos County, and then the 2 municipalities of Bryan and College Station. They emergency operation management coordinators for each of those organizations' offices on a normal basis out of our facility, but they've activated, they have additional personnel there, and they are operating the emergency operations and emergency responses for each of those organizations to COVID-19 and the different things that have come about associated with the pandemic and management of the thing, from personal protective equipment that the community is gathering and providing, to different donations, organizing all of the police and other responses in groups, and enforcement of the different orders and et cetera, is all happening out of one of our facilities during the pandemic. We also have several pipeline control customers who have pipeline controllers. Obviously, the pipelines don't stop flowing products during a pandemic, so the pipeline controllers keep going to work. We have some of those that split their controllers into 2 groups, one working at the home office and a separate group working at the business continuity office space. They're live operations, so they can operate concurrently without an interruption, and they're utilizing it that way. We have other customers who split their teams into multiple groups, similar to what we did here at Fibertown, and they actually have people working at an office in our Bryan Disaster Recovery Center, and then other people working at their home office, and a part of their teams working from home. And they're able to respond to the pandemic and keep key team members segregated in groups that won't be cross-transmitting among to take the whole company down in case something does happen with an exposure to COVID-19.
Great. Thanks for that. And kind of what you were going into leads well into the next question. I think maybe we'll answer it from both sides, the HORNE Cyber side and Fibertown side. But the question is, how are you protecting employees and customers as a designated essential business? You know, and obviously Fibertown as data center and disaster recovery services organization is an essential business. Cybersecurity has been identified as an essential business. So both of our organizations are obviously having to remain in full operations. I'll just answer real quick from the HORNE Cyber side. We are, taking very measured steps to protect our employees and our clients on a day-to-day basis. All of our offices are currently closed. We do have client meetings by appointment only. And as we start to reopen our offices, our team members, when they come back, we're following the CDC guidelines, spacing all of our employees 6 feet apart, having face masks for any interaction with employees where we can't keep that 6 foot distance. And then from our client standpoint, we're doing everything right now via Zoom. We've learned that some of the areas that we thought we needed to be on site to support our clients, we're just as effective by doing that using Zoom. So Jacob or Joe, I'll pass that to one of you guys to talk a little bit more about what you're doing to protect your employees and customers at Fibertown.
Absolutely. I know Joe mentioned that we split teams, and that's kind of our N+1 redundancy in staff. So, if all staff are together and one person gets COVID, for example, then it stands to reason that everybody's exposed to it. So we reduce the possibility of exposure by splitting teams and keeping people on 21-day rotations where half work remote, half work local. For our customers, we early on, and we often do this in what we declare an emergency event or something where there's a hurricane. We will list all on-site hands and eyes services as free, so that we can discourage them from having to come to site, whether it be because travel is dangerous, like in a hurricane or a flood, or because you could be exposed to COVID-19 or increase the potential for exposure. This encourages them to lean on our team for support. And we have done quite a bit. I think I saw a question in there that asked, what we've done to support our customers. And we've done quite a few things that people wouldn't have usually asked us to do, all the way from racking and stacking entire racks and cabling them, and even doing the initial console in to set IPs and everything so they could access it remotely. But this is all in the interest of keeping them from having to travel or being exposed to more people, and allowing them to be able to operate remotely and still further their business. I mean, we've got a variety of industries that we support. One of those is healthcare. And as this event spun up, some of our healthcare customers needed to add capacity, both on network bandwidth, which we did rapidly, but also by adding systems to support themselves and support their operations. And we've been implemented into helping them facilitate that through a number of different things. But in addition, I mean, we are following the CDC guidelines, maintaining safe distance for our staff. We've used masks and special cleaning preparations. One example in particular is while we were on split staff, we had a staff member actually get sick, not with COVID, but at the time we didn't know. So she ended up having bronchitis. She's better now. So we did a deep clean. We have a partnership with a company that would come in and do that for us. We ensured that all staff was separate of her, and you know, we have our split teams. So one, nobody got COVID, but two, even the remote team wasn't even exposed to her, so they didn't have the opportunity to become infected because of her. But anything to add, Joe?
Yeah, I think you mentioned the special cleaning that we're taking on, and we've asked customers to schedule their visits so that we can make sure that we don't have 7 customers in close proximity or any number in the same area. We made our normal common areas for use by appointment only, so that we could manage the number of people wanting to use the space at the same time, but at the same time, it gave us an opportunity to clean between uses and to make sure that we were handling that health. Interestingly, we saw very few people wanting to use those spaces during the same period of time with the pandemic, but at the same time, we don't want to fail to take precautions because we think somebody won't use the facilities. We've also, you know, in some of these business continuity office spaces, we're working with specific customer requests. One customer, they take out their trash from the office and throw it in the hallway at 9:30 a.m. and we carry that trash away without ever interacting with anybody on their team at all. We have another customer who maintains their continuity office suite with supplies of food so that their 24/7 team can make meals and coffee and all sorts of other confectionery items 24/7. And we've been maintaining the stock of those supplies. It's been a little interesting finding some of those items during this pandemic event, but we've been able to keep everything stocked up and everybody happy and satisfied, and meet some special requests as well on top of it. So honestly, anything you can imagine that will support the success of our customer, that's what we're doing to make sure that we're supporting their success during this pandemic.
Well, great. Thanks for that. And since we're coming up on time, I just wanted to ask each of the panelists, and I'll start with you, Brad. What's that one takeaway or one action item related to cyber or business resiliency that you think all the attendees should take away today? I think you're on mute, Brad.
Sorry about that.
Sorry.
All right, I'm off mute now. So I said it's really hard to just say one, but at the top of my list from a technical standpoint, multi-factor authentication, I mean, is really just, it's one of those things you got to throw in your security stack. It's a layer that's essential at this point. A couple more quick things, taken away from some of the things I said, is around inventory. Like you can't manage what you don't measure, or you can't manage what you don't measure. So an inventory of your domain name ownership, look at the settings there, ensure, have your IT people ensure that there are no domain transfers allowed. When do they expire? Things like that. Inventory of your SSL certificates around expiration. You don't want expired SSL certificates on the public internet. It's just a red flag for an attacker to go look at it and figure out why. Evaluate the split tunnel versus full tunnel VPN. I mean, that's a common term for technical people. They should understand that, but it's really something that needs to be evaluated to see if it's a good fit for your organization. And then finally, 2 things. Evaluate the process for monetary transactions. I've seen a lot of people that are getting scammed out of money because they're not verifying who they're dealing with. They're just taking it for granted that it's the controller, and it's actually not the controller. It's an impersonation attack. And so they send money and change ACH numbers and things like that. So, there's got to be a good, solid verification of who you're dealing with when it comes to monetary transactions. And then finally, partying with someone not on your staff to inspect the configurations of your systems from an attacker standpoint, not from a compliance standpoint or how it was configured, but can an attacker exploit your systems as they sit? And the only way to do that is to have someone that knows how to emulate what an attacker does.
Great. Thanks, Brad. Jacob, what would be your one takeaway related to business resilience today?
Well, I guess we can all say that this is not an expected event, COVID-19. So I guess be prepared for the unexpected, and having a plan is way better than not having a plan. Having the ability to resume business if your office is unavailable, or consider every aspect of your business as if what if that was gone tomorrow, and think forward from there. Like, how would we recover? How would we move forward without that person or that thing or that resource? And just act based on not knowing that everything's permanent, or some things may change in a way that you hadn't expected. So try to be prepared for that.
Great. Thanks, Jacob. Joe, what's your one action item or takeaway?
My one takeaway is ask yourself those difficult questions, and specifically, about is my infrastructure going to survive this event, for any event you can imagine, but also who am I doing business with? Do I consider this vendor as a partner? Can I say that they have my best interest at heart? And with Fibertown, I would say you absolutely can say that. We want to be your trusted partner.
All right. Well, thanks, Joe, and thanks to all the panelists. And with that, Stacy, I'll turn it over to you to wrap up.
Thanks, Mike. We really appreciate y'all joining us today, and we hope you gained several good takeaways from today's webinar. And in closing, you're going to receive an email requesting some brief feedback on today's webinar. We really would appreciate if you take the time to let us know what was valuable for you today, and please let us know also any areas where we can improve. And with that, I'm going to say thanks again, and have a great rest of your day, everyone. Bye now.